Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rally Day Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Welcome to another episode of the Rally Day Partners Founders Journey podcast, coming to you live from our Denver, Colorado headquarters with entrepreneur, founder, cyclist, friend, Jonathan Vaughters. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. You don't have like a list of like 10 different sponsors like they do on Lance's podcast?
No, we're not quite that commercial yet, JD.
Every like 3 seconds, you're like, oh, and this moment brought to you by.
I only may need to do a shout out to my mom and my brother who have been loyal fans so far. But
yeah, okay. Yeah, perfect. Your mom's the sponsor. Yeah, my mom was my sponsor for years and years.
Yeah. Anytime you're an athlete, I think that is the case. Listen, this is a unique episode for a few reasons. One, my older brother and I have always dreamt of showcasing athletes as founders in their own right. It's one of those endeavors that, like a founder, athletes have to sing for their supper every day. There's a scarcity of assets and funding and resources, lots of innovation, lots of grinding, and lots of loneliness, I think, at times, at least from my experience. Jonathan was a fellow that I always looked up to when I was an Olympic athlete, and probably more because he was like one of the smart guys, and in sport, you've kind of got a mixed bag there. And Jonathan was always just someone that I really looked up to. He was, of course, pursuing a cycling career, and we're about the same age. And I was pursuing my skiing career, and now we're both CEOs and founders. And over our many dinners, over many glasses of wine, we have had a number of podcasts already. Jonathan is known for big talk versus small talk, and I just love that. And in terms of your resume, my Lord, I actually put pen to paper, which I normally don't do, but I wanted to nail this one. For those of you who are unfamiliar or less familiar with cycling, Jonathan is an American icon. He busted through, during his career in a fairly European-dominated sport and really took our country to the next level, winning the team time trial in 2001 of the Tour de France. He won the Mount Ventoux climb during the Dauphiné, which is a major lead-up race up to the Tour. The Mount Ventoux climb is, I think, the hardest climb out there because it's I don't know how many miles it is, but it's straight away, it's windy, it's steep, it's long, it's hot. And to win that thing, you've got to have a lot of grit. And he actually held the record for a time up until, was it Mayo that beat you?
Even Mayo, yeah.
Even Mayo eventually beat your record. But anyway, I don't want to really dwell too much on his cycling career because what he's done since is nothing short of remarkable in terms of reinventing pro cycling, really around pillars of ethics, no doping. I would say like humanizing professional cycling when the typical stereotype is a very stoic, to themselves kind of athlete. He's really been a proponent of building a team that is provocative on the race course, but evocative outside of their racing careers, and really encouraging his riders to align with him, but be themselves, which is a very similar, I guess, philosophy as we have at Rally Day. He also brought down like the entire cycling world in 2012. There was a lag between his career when he was building his new team, EF Pro Cycling, that he founded and is CEO. There's a lot of story there, which we'll get into, but it was a courageous act that was at great cost to him personally and to others, frankly, but it was necessary, and the sport will forever be different. And it reminds me of great business entrepreneurs who decide to break all the rules and break all the glass along the way. And again, it's a very inspiring story. Jonathan is also like a Renaissance man. Aside from his being a cyclist and an entrepreneur, he's an incredible writer. Not just his book, which is also excellent. It's called One Way Ticket, 9 Lives and 2 Wheels, where he chronicles his journey as a founder and as an athlete. He speaks 3 languages, one including English, I think. pretty well.
That's the
Uh,
weak.
yeah, he's a wine and art enthusiast. He's a pilot. I think he's got twin engine license now. And if I could poke you a little bit, Jonathan, I've always considered you a you're going to hate me for this, a Denver fashion icon
Oh well, that's
and
a
a and
that's
a
a
gulasch.
big fish, small pond.
But anyway, this is going to be a fun conversation, especially for those who really admire athletes, and especially those that go on to do even bigger and better things after their professional athletic careers. So I'm sorry to be so effusive here, Jonathan, but I really admire you, and you've been a big part of my life, and you're a dear friend, and I'm just super excited that you're here.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for having me. And that's yeah, boy. I mean, I never actually put all the pieces of that resume together. So there you go. You know, I'll add in probably the only person you know that has an MBA that never got an undergrad degree. And then my latest thing, I'm a watch collector now. So,
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, my latest obsession.
That's funny. What's your favorite watch?
Um, I mean, probably the one I'm wearing right now, which is it's a 1973, so that's my birth year. Rolex 6263, which is like an early version of the Daytona, and it's I don't know, it's a whatever. It's kind of cool because it was like this very remarkable watch that wasn't particularly popular in the early 70s, but now people now people think it's pretty nifty, and so I found one in my birth year, and yeah, that's my favorite one.
You've always got a hobby that seems to turn into an obsession. Of all the years I've known you, there's always kind of this rotation of I'm
Yeah.
going to go deep here for a while, and then the next time I see you, I ask you about watches, for example, and you've moved on to collecting airplanes. So
Yeah, no, I mean, well, listen, I mean, I still am an obsessive art collector as well, but it's just, I think probably I kind of, it's those hobbies all remain. I mean, I've loved fishing my entire life, right? But it's true that I go through this like obsessive phase and then it plateaus out a little bit. But and it's not that, I'll come back to it, but there is a rotation there. So it's not, don't worry, the watches will stick. They probably just won't be as intense as they are right now.
that's so cool. You're just a lifelong learner. And listen, in terms of the allocation of our time, I do want to touch on your cycling career a little bit, just to give our listeners context. I want to double click on your decision in 2012 to, reform cycling, which I know was brutal on you. But I'd rather spend maybe just over half on your business career, which is maybe a more subtle part of your life and one that, I really respect. So I think for our audience, especially just hearing what you learned from cycling that you've been able to apply to being a founder would be really interesting. So if you're up to that,
Yeah,
the sequence.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your cycling career. You grew up in Denver. I know that you kind of, I wouldn't say fell into cycling, but the urban legend is not that your parents were necessarily, the classic little league mom and dad who wanted you to be in the majors, and you sort of, you know, crept your way into the sport and then ultimately became, you know, incredibly famous. Can you talk to us about how you got into cycling and sort of maybe end with some of the things you're most proud of?
Yeah, so the story. I mean, my parents were not into athletics or especially not into bike racing at all. But they were always very supportive. I mean, my mother is a learning disabilities teacher, and my father's an attorney, and so this was just a very foreign world for them. So the way I got into it, I wasn't particularly good at traditional American sports, football, baseball. I mean, I was a skinny, kind of uncoordinated, little tiniest kid in my class. When I look at my third grade class picture, I'm like the smallest kid by like a long way. And so those sports never really had any sort of big appeal to me. Well, I was just going to get run over if I tried them anyway. But I always liked like racing stuff, and in that era, the far south suburbs of Denver, you were basically right on the edge of, the plains, and there's just nothing. My parents had this house that was like the last development, and after our house was just a dirt field. And so my sort of neighborhood buddies and we'd ride our bikes around in those dirt fields, and then we ended up, getting newspaper routes and buying these like cheap go-karts and trashing around on go-karts all day. And I always loved, I don't know, speed, right? And did some go-kart racing, very low level go-kart racing. Loved the competition part of that. All of a sudden it was sort of the fact that I was tiny actually helped me as opposed to hurt me in a competitive field. But anyway, as I got a little bit older, of course, we all start getting interested in girls, in my case. So there was this girl I was interested in, and I would drive the go-kart over to her house, which is like 6 miles away, right? I mean, in modern context, you imagine your 12, 13-year-old kid just taking a go-kart out on the road and driving over to his girlfriend's house that's like 6 miles away. And after like the third time that the Arapahoe County Sheriff stopped me, called my parents, said, "You cannot just like drive this on I-25. That is illegal." I finally basically kind of got like grounded from the go-kart. And this kid down the street, his dad was a triathlete, and this is a little bit coincidental, but it kind of happened at the same time. His dad was a triathlete, and there was one thing in his garage that we were not allowed to touch under any circumstance, and that was the racing bike, right? The racing bike was like, do not touch that. If you kids touch that, I will kill you. Well, he goes out of town on business, and of course, what's the first thing we do? We go and all of a sudden I realized, wait a minute, this thing's pretty fast. And actually, I think I can go pretty fast on this, and I can definitely get over to this girl's house on this bike, and the police are not going to stop me. And so I sold my go-kart. Like, I was like the next week, sold the go-kart, done with the go-kart, went out and bought a racing bike, an entry-level racing bike. And that was my motivation. And then, I don't know, it was just like you're talking about obsessive hobbies, right? Of course, like I deep dive this stuff, just like the art collection, the watches, or the fishing, or all these. All of a sudden I want to know everything about cycling and bike racing. And so I'm gathering as much information as I can to learn about this. And then I sign up for my first bike race. And, I did it with no coaching, I didn't even have the right shoes. I was wearing a pair of those, like, remember those those corduroy OP short shorts? Yeah, I was riding an OP short shorts and like a t-shirt. I got murdered. My first bike race, I was dead last. And here's where this is an interesting thing. This is one of these parenting moments that I will always appreciate my father for, is that, so it was this race called the Red Zinger Mini Classic, which is like a 5-day race back then, right? And day one was a time trial. I just didn't know how to ride a time trial. I rode it like I'll just ride casually down, and got last. I was so depressed from getting last. I just said, "Dad, let's just go home. I don't want to do the next day of racing. Like I'm just as crappy as this as I am at any other sport." And my dad basically said, "Nope, you started it. You're going to finish it." And he said, "We paid the entry fee. You said you wanted to do this. You're not just quitting." And he forced me. You have to know my father well enough. My father didn't force me to do anything. I mean, my father was valedictorian of his high school. He went to school on a full scholarship, came out, went into the Navy as an officer, was a highly decorated officer in the Navy. My father's, he was a childhood savant on the piano. I mean, he's an unbelievably dedicated, intelligent, and hardworking person. So for him to have this kid that wasn't particularly good at school, wasn't particularly good at sports, wanted to drop out of this race, he never forced me to do anything. He was always like, "You will find your passion. I'm not going to force you to do anything," despite the fact that he was incredibly successful. And that was the one time he did. The one time in my entire childhood where he made me do something. And I got out, and the next day was not a time trial, it was a mass start race. And even though, okay, this time I finished, 8th to last as opposed to last, but it was an improvement. And I loved it. I again loved the racing. And so we get down to the last of the 5 days. And actually by the last day of the 5 days, I was sort of like mid-pack. I wasn't even close to the end of it anymore. And I told my dad that last day, next year I'm going to come back and win this thing. And I learned all about the training and all about the equipment and, and again, like no coaching, but I really got into like every little last aspect of the sport and came back and the next year won it.
How old were you when you won that race?
13.
Wow. Take us from 13 to, I know there was a lot of steps, but take us from 13 to becoming actually on a professional cycling team. When did that happen?
So it's a long path. People ask me this all the time. Well, how do you become a professional cyclist? Because, in the United States, how you become a pro football player, it's pretty obvious, right? Like you play little Tykes football, then you move into, high school. And then if you're really good at high school, you get recruited by a university. If you're university, you get recruited to the NFL. I mean, it's not easy, but the path is there. You can see the path is actually pretty clear. With cycling, it's very much do it yourself. I mean, you've got to figure out your path. There are certain points where people help you along. So when I went to my first national championship at 14, after winning the state championship in Colorado, and was third place in the U.S. National Junior Championship, my first one. And from that, I was invited to participate in Olympic Training Center training camps down in Colorado Springs. And from those camps, they would select teams that went to Europe and the European trip. So this is a little bit similar, I'm sure, to, cross-country skiing and, what you did in Nordic. So, we do our first European trips, and it's a bunch of, 15, 16-year-olds going over to Europe without their parents and, with a coach that's sort of minimally responsible for their well-being. And all these coaches were like these old school Eastern European guys. It was like everybody, as soon as, you could get out of Eastern Europe, the first thing they did was like come to the United States and like, great, I can coach kids. This will be perfect. So, all of our coaches, they talk like this. They say, hey, why you no ride bike today? Just because raining is like shower, you go ride bike. Cold not matter. Anyway, so that's our first coaching experience with these hardcore Eastern European guys that really kind of didn't care whether you lived or died. There was no like whatever wellness, mental well-being. No. This was just, I remember one of my first coaches, this training camp was way too hard. We were clearly totally overtrained. And he said, what I do is like carton of eggs. You throw all 12 eggs, you throw them against the wall as hard as possible, and maybe one egg don't break. That one egg that don't break, that is the best egg. So that's how he treated, that was coaching, is we were just thrown against a cement wall to see which one of us cracked. Yeah, and then, it was like more European trips and then South American trips. And ultimately, the point at which I was able to turn professional is I did the Vuelta a Venezuela, which was a big race back then. It's even crazy to think that there would have been like a large international race in Venezuela nowadays. But anyway, this is late 80s, early 90s. And it was like I was winning the race for a while, and then magically on the last day, I got a time penalty for like not signing in on time or what. Anyway, I got second place to a guy from Venezuela. That's
a surprise. That was the beginning of their end.
That's how South America works. But there was this Spanish team there that took note. So this isn't quite right, because they were a Spanish professional team that had an amateur arm to their team, and they invited me to be on the amateur team, to come live in Spain, all expenses paid, to be on the amateur team. So flew over to Spain. Yeah, this is again my poor parents. It's like you're signing some sort of odd contract via fax to just go to someone you don't know in Spain, with zero information as to what the or not even what the outcome is going to be, who these people even were, but somehow they let me do it. And I get there, and in the first week we do all this medical testing. And so we're doing this medical testing, and, part of it is the typical like VO2 max test, which is measuring your maximum oxygen consumption. But then part of it was also they did an ultrasound of your heart. And in the ultrasound of your heart, the biggest thing they were looking at, obviously, do you have a healthy heart? But they're also looking at the size of the left ventricle, because the size of the left ventricle is one of the biggest genetic determinant factors of whether you can be a good endurance athlete or not. And so I'm all signed up for this amateur team, and all of a sudden these two doctors come in to the room and sit down with the manager of the team, and they're like, listen, change of plan here. And I'm, oh, okay, what's going on? And they like show me this ultrasound, which I don't really understand. They show me my blood test results, which again, at this point, I don't really understand. And they said, listen, these are all the physical qualities of a professional rider. We're not going to waste your time putting you in amateur races in Spain. Here's a pro contract, sign it. And I signed a pro contract right there. And that was the beginning of the adventure of being a professional cyclist, is, due to a large left ventricle.
It's just your big heart, JB.
Yeah, exactly. It is quite literally my big heart. But yeah. And then from there, it was just a progression of a lot of suffering, a lot of being really outclassed and outperformed initially, but just sticking with it despite every bit of logic saying that I shouldn't, and just grinding it. And then eventually seeing little glimpses of hope that maybe I could be pretty good. It took me 4 years before I won a race in the professional ranks, and it took me 6 years before I won anything of any significance in the professional ranks. So it was not a just bounce into it and be successful immediate process at all. It was tough, and it was very lonely. For, like, as you mentioned, living in Europe by yourself. Luckily, I had this family that sort of took me in. That they didn't even speak Spanish. They spoke Valenciano, which is this like dialect of, well, it's not. It's actually a different language. It's not even a dialect of Spanish. And that was the funniest thing, because I would listen and try to get along with the family, and I was trying to learn Spanish, but they were just speaking a totally different language. And I don't think I didn't know that for like 6 months. And finally I was like, wait a minute, I get it. It's not that my brain doesn't work. It's that you guys aren't speaking Spanish. Anyway, but they somehow became my family when I was in Europe. And that was enough to like get me out training every day, is that I at least there was sort of somebody to at least smile at when I got home.
I totally get that. I had a very similar experience in my career with a couple named Jane and Ed Hill. I want to, before we get to the juicy, sexy part of your career, just double down on, the amount of losing that individual sports requires. And when people talk to me about my career, and some of them get into this question about, what's the difference between being a team sport athlete and being an individual athlete. And I guess the conventional wisdom is that us individual athletes don't learn as many leadership skills being in an individual sport. And I don't agree with that, because you've got a team around you. And in many cases, particularly in cycling, it is kind of a funny hybrid of a team and individual sport. But one of the things that is unique is that in a team sport, there's a 50-50 chance, more or less, that you're going to win. Depending upon your sport, like every weekend, you've got a pretty good shot of winning. Whereas in an individual sport, you may have 100 people on the starting line, and the odds of you winning is 1 out of 100. And the odds of you losing is 99 out of 100. And for most people in an individual sport, you can go an entire career and never win on the world stage. And to this point in my office, my mom and dad gave me the first ski trophy I ever won. I took the plaque, the brass plaque off of it, and I replaced it with the words of my Olympic ski coach that said, "Winning requires lots of losing." And I've carried that sort of mentality into my work life, and realized that the extent to which you are a really good loser usually is what makes you an extraordinary winner. The lessons that you learn, from losing, the innovation that it catalyzes, just getting up the next day and facing the music and walking around with that feeling of rejection and failure and being okay with yourself. A lot of founders of businesses that I talk to, they have this expression, an overnight success, 10 years in the making. Well, those 10 years they're talking about was when no one would talk to them about their dumb business they were starting. And all of a sudden, they're $1 billion business and everyone thinks they're cool. But in an individual sport, there's just so much of the work that gets done while you're a loser. And can you? We haven't really talked about this, Jonathan, but can you elaborate on that and what you've seen now being, a manager and CEO of a team in that respect?
Well, I mean, right off the bat, I mean, like I said, I got last in my first race. I don't think many people would, after getting last in their first race, would come back and say, I want to. I want to build a world-class organization against this like incredible talent that I have that I just got last in. I mean, I mean, statistically, right off the bat, right? So between our men's team and our women's team, we're racing around 350 days of racing a year, right? So actually, it's a little more. It's like 380. Sorry, no, it's 380. And as of right now, we on both the men's team and the women's team, I would say we're enjoying like an incredibly successful year on both sides. And between the two organizations, we have 31 race wins, meaning we're winning 10% of the time, basically. And if we can keep up a 10% win ratio to the end of the year, I will be ecstatic about that. The point of it is you spend, even in your best moments in professional cycling, even in your best years where everything is going right, you're spending 90% of your time losing. So, and I don't think that just doesn't even make sense, because if imagine if the Nuggets lost 90% of their games, I mean, it was like they'd be driven out of town, or I mean, it's just not even.
By the way, there were some years when that did happen.
Yeah, but it was never like 90%. It was, but the point of it is you're right that team sports, it's every time you go out on the court or go out on the field, it's 50-50. Now, of course, there's better teams and they're going to win more often and whatever, but essentially you 50-50 odds. Professional cycling, you show up, okay, it's you and there's 170 other guys. So again, just the odds are 1 out of 170. You're not gonna win a whole lot, and then you throw in all the X factors that exist in cycling, crashes and flat tires and this, that, and the other thing. And yeah, you spend a lot of time losing. And I can tell you on the business side of the sport, which, we are a sponsorship, partnership, revenue driven industry, i.e. like selling the naming rights of the team. So our team is not called, whatever the Denver Bicyclists or whatever. We're, EF Pro Cycling, right? And selling those naming rights, that's your big hunk of income. It's selling all the other side ancillary sponsors is that as well. I'd say 99% of the time in sponsorship sales, the answer is no. So the number of times that I get told no, because this isn't fundraising for a VC fund or private equity fund or to try to this is high. You're going to give me money and I'm going to use that money and you're never going to get it back. Like this, it's like that South Park episode where, have you seen where when he goes in and invests his money and the guy goes, and it's gone. I mean, so professional cycling, what we're giving you is the return on investment is the fact that your name is being mentioned over and over and over again, in international broadcast, the fact that it's written, the fact that your logo is seen, the fact that you can draw positive social media association with, a high performance organization, all of those things. But, you're convincing, I mean, pro cycling teams now are like minimum at the first division $30 million. So you're basically saying I have to go out and find $30 million of startup, because that's kind of what it is, every year, and then it's all gone by the end of the year, and I got to find 30 million again and again and again and again and again and again. So there just aren't there. It's very difficult to find people that are going to say yes to that equation, to say yes. Okay, the shotgun branding, the broadcast branding that you have is going to be effective for my organization. And we can prove the metrics. We can prove that we're 20 times more successful than buying a 20-second ad slot on TV, or we're actually, from a pure branding standpoint, we're even more effective than doing real targeted stuff with like Google AdSense. I mean, we're very good at getting your name in front of eyeballs. We're incredibly effective at that. But and it's inside of a large publicly traded company that it might be interested in sponsorship, all I'll say is nobody ever got fired for buying a 15-second ad slot on NBC, whereas sports sponsorships are always, there's always one member on the board that's going to go, what are we doing this for? This doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, you can tell them that there's a 10% chance you're going to win, though.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing is, exactly. You say, well, thank you for the $30 million. And like, we're probably going to lose next weekend. I mean, that's not the way I phrase it, but yeah, but that's true. I mean, that's true.
Well, we're going to get into that a bit later. I want to finish up your career. Look, you had some amazing moments, most of which I got to watch or at least read about as a kid. Let's just do one. What like it's been 23 years, 22 years since you hung it up.
Yeah.
What was the high water mark? What was the moment when you were at your best? The result spoke for itself, and you ended the day, went to sleep, and you were like, that was my best experience as a professional cyclist.
Well, that's actually hard for me to unpack because it's not so simple, meaning that my most publicized, publicly known victory, which most people would consider the pinnacle of my career, was winning and setting the record up the Mont Ventoux. But to me, that was not really even close to my favorite moment in my career, because that's at a moment where I'm on Lance Armstrong's U.S. Postal Service cycling team. I'm his teammate, and we're doping out of our minds. So I win that competition, and after I won it, my thought was almost like a kid that sees the strings in a puppet show for the first time. I was just like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. I see how this works now. I spent the last 5 years beating my head against a brick wall, and then all of a sudden, this sort of like magical element gives you. And it. By the way, like people think that like doping is this huge advantage. It's very tiny. I mean, it's only in like very highly trained athletes that it even makes a difference. Like, believe me, if any of you go out there and decide to start taking EPO, it won't do anything for you. You will like, in fact, it might make you feel worse, and you might get a heart attack as a result of it. So don't do that. It only works in like this, the 99.99th percentile of elite level athletes. But in that subset, that tiny little advantage actually is very meaningful. And it all of a sudden sort of just cracks you through being, from being right there and like being able to see the guy who wins, but never being able to, boom, like you just make that last little step. And so it was a moment where I beat the best riders in the world. I mean, I killed Lance that day. But it didn't have that much meaning to me personally. It was just kind of like a career step or something. It was very cold. It was like, okay, this is, did what I had to do to get it done. And I didn't particularly like that side of me. Now, my favorite moment, although a lot of times you didn't forget it, but a lot of times people do forget it, was a few years later. And what I had done in my life is I had stepped away from the U.S. Postal Service cycling team, which people thought was insane at that point in time, because it was the most highly regarded cycling team in the world. And I left to a smaller French team, a less well-regarded French team. But it was a team, because of the way the crackdowns on doping were starting to work, French teams were under a much higher degree of scrutiny at that point in time. And so the French teams were regarded and were operationally, essentially, they had cleaned up their act. Whereas obviously, a lot of foreign teams, including American teams, had not cleaned up their act. So I knew that there was no way I was going to stay on U.S. Postal Service or any other team that was, actively doping, and that I was going to be able to say no. That was not going to happen. I had to remove myself from the environment in order to remove myself from the temptation. And I did that, and I wasn't sure. I was like, well, my performance is probably going to drop way off, and and in some ways it did. But that year, years later in 2001, we won the team time trial in the Tour de France, which is an incredibly unique. So stage 5 of the Tour de France, it's an incredibly unique event in cycling where it's not a big peloton. It's the teams are separated by a number of minutes, and it's just the 8 riders, 9 riders just doing everything it can to propel the team as a whole as fast as possible. The time is always taken on the 4th rider across the line, so you can't just totally disintegrate the team and have one guy speed off at the end. You've got to keep the unit together the entire time. Actually, at that point in time, it would have been 50.
It's like rowing in many ways.
Yeah.
If you've ever watched that,
very,
or read the book Men in the Boat or whatever it's called.
Yeah, and it's like if you got one person that they're not in sync with the rest, it doesn't work. And but anyway, we won stage 5, the team time of the tour, against all odds. And looking back on it, really against all odds, because as at that point in time, I was kind of hopeful that a lot of the newly introduced anti-doping regulations had started to slow things down, even in the non-French teams, but it had not. And as those revelations occurred, that like I always kind of discussed doping as like a thing of the 90s, but it continued on into the 2000s, and I don't, to this day, so our competition were 2 teams, U.S. Postal Service and ONCE, which are 2 teams that were majorly involved in massive, like endemic, systemic, doping scandals. And how we beat them is sort of one of those, I don't know. I mean, I know the team I was on at that point in time was clean. I know my team. I mean, I know what we were doing and what we weren't doing, and and we won. I mean, so to me, that was sort of like the most magical moment. I mean, later on in the mountains of the Tour de France, we got killed. We all got murdered, right? But that day, stage 5 in Epernay, which is basically where champagne is made, we beat the best in the world as a dead clean team. And so to me, that, even though it's not necessarily my individual accomplishment because I did it with 8 other guys, but it is it's the most meaningful moment in my career, because I can always say, heart on hand or hand on Bible, etc. I can say we won that day clean. I won stage 5 of the Tour de France, and I'm not afraid of any questions ever being asked of that, because I know how it was done.
Yeah, I mean, it just gave me goosebumps when you were talking about that story. And I did watch that stage, and Credit Agricole, which I think was the team that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Was, very loudly a clean and ethical team. In part because, in France, if you got caught doping, you would go to jail.
Yeah, 7-year jail sentence.
Pretty high stakes. But it makes me wonder, how much the pride of integrity can be more powerful than maybe some of the technical, or in that case, illegal, shenanigans, and just what that pride of doing it the right way can do to the human heart that EPO can't touch. I think that might be a good launching pad, JV, into what you did with that inspiration. I've oft wondered if it was that day when you decided, I am going to be a founder. I am going to start a new cycling team. We are going to do it right. And I'm going to try to bring that esprit de corps more systematically at scale. And we're going to be an entirely different kind of cycling team than the world has ever known. Tell us about when you made the decision to start Slipstream, which for those of you who are unaware, that's kind of like the quote unquote generic name of Jonathan's cycling team. And then it always has a sponsor attached to it for promotional reasons. But it was a big deal when you started that team, particularly since you said, if you're going to be on my team, you are not only going to be required to be clean, but if you weren't clean, you're going to talk about it and be very open about your journey to a maybe more virtuous version of your career. Tell us about that. That's a big deal.
Yeah. So the way that started is a little bit more complex. So, I was hopeful even in 2001, and, being on a French team, you basically got pulled out of the doping loop, right? You just didn't get as much information. You didn't know exactly what everyone was doing all the time. Whereas on other teams, it was like the rumor mill was constant. And because of that, I thought, and I saw that, there were new tests coming into play that were detecting more and more doping substances. I thought, okay, like this is a pretty hopeful situation, but so that's kind of, I mean, when I left my racing career, what I saw was, and it wasn't hopeful, actually. This is the exact, but what I saw is it was almost becoming, as opposed to in the 90s, I would describe it as just everyone was doping. That was that, right? You get into the 2000s, and this is where like the Lance's narrative of, well, everyone was doing it, so I was just the one blamed for it. That's actually just not true at all. Once you get into the 2000s, fewer and fewer and fewer athletes were doping. Like there were people, maybe they had their conscience caught up with them. Maybe it was because the tests were getting better. But there were a variety of reasons, or national laws, like in France, where it was like, 7-year jail sentence. It's a little bit trickier to mess with that. And, the peloton was getting cleaner and cleaner and cleaner, but the riders that were not were winning more and more and more and more, because obviously the advantage that you had, as opposed to the 90s, the advantage, would have been, debatable, right? Like, I mean, certain people it's always going to affect more than others. But by the time you get into 2000, the advantage that the guys who sort of were ahead of the test still and weren't worried about the national laws and were like still just doing it, I mean, they were way ahead of the rest of the peloton. And you see that in the racing, right, as you get into sort of the mid 2000s. And so that was that fact, because I watched my crediacal teammates who were very talented, very hardworking. I watched them just suffer, I think there was maybe this brief time window around 2001 when we won the team time trial where like it was sort of like people were just scared enough of the laws or whatever. It seemed like we were able to win a little bit that year, but then as people became less scared and they started getting ahead of the tests again, it just devolved. And then it devolved into the situation where everyone wasn't doing it. It was like 75% of the guys weren't doing it and 25% were. And the 25% that were winning everything. And that was just depressing. So I left the sport, started up my own business, little real estate business. That was sort of fun. And it was actually going pretty well. And so I was like, okay, well, I'd like to do something fun in the sport of cycling. So I started sponsoring this group of kids. There's 6 of these kids just from Colorado. And what's crazy about this is this will never happen again. Of these 6 kids, 3 of them either went to the Olympics or went to the Tour de France. Like 50% of them turned into like 99th percentile world-class athlete out of these like 6 kids that I just found in like 2004. It's pretty nuts. But as they got older, I realized, whoa, this is a problem. Like, what did I just do? I just basically coached a bunch of kids and supported a bunch of kids to become professionals so that they can go right back into the environment where, unless they start doping, they're never going to win anything. That was stupid. I mean, and I was like really hopeful that laws and tests and restrictions were catching up, and they were, but what was lacking is just sort of a line in the sand, is to say, okay, basically just someone standing up and saying, this is how we're going to do it. And if you want to like come check our homework, come do it. Like we're open. You want to look at our blood tests, look at our blood tests. You want to, just being totally open and transparent with medical records, which is, not an easy thing to get riders to sign up to, just to say we're not holding anything back. We're gonna test above and beyond. We're gonna release the tests. We're gonna put that out there. And you draw a lot of criticism when you make that sort of move. And what I also thought was fundamentally lacking in the efforts to curb doping at that point in time, it was honesty. And I don't know how, this is the most obvious thing out there, but it's a really hard thing to execute on, is that if you say to somebody, listen, we need you to be honest, like the only way these anti-doping officials are ever going to figure out what's going on behind the scenes so they can actually catch, the people who are cheating. The only way they're going to do that is if somebody actually speaks to them directly and is just straightforward with them and says, here's how it's working. Here's how to, this is the system. Here's how to get in there and to solve this, right? But if you do that, you just basically threw yourself under the bus, and then you're going to get suspended, and no one in the sport is ever going to hire you again. If you basically say, well, I did this, and this, and here's how to stop it, like, you were persona non grata, and you would never get a job in the world of bike racing again. So basically, because of that attitude, we were trying to solve doping and forcing everyone to lie about it, which was absurd. It's like, basically, like, we're trying to solve this massive issue that no one can admit ever happened. So I mean, how do you do that? How do you solve a huge sociological problem in the entire sport when everyone is basically forced to lie? They'll be like, well, I've heard this happen, but I wouldn't know about that. I mean, it was absurd. So what we did that was, I think, truly the turning point is we basically said to the people on our team, listen, we were never a zero tolerance team. In fact, I actually really despise that term, zero tolerance, because, by the way, like, no one's zero tolerance of anything, because none of us know what each of us does in our own private time. And so zero tolerance meaning we're not going to hire anyone who has ever doped in their career, and we're not going to dope on this team. That sounds really good. And I'm sure under scrutiny that, I don't know, that looks really nice in the public to say that, but it's not realistic. It's bullshit. So the way we did it was, there will be no doping on this team, and we require you to be entirely honest, and we are going to guarantee your employment after that honesty, i.e., like, you can come forward, say, I did this, and this, and we're going to keep paying you. And that was a whole different, that changed everything. It was the first time that you saw people just basically saying, yeah, I mean, this is how I did it. This is what happened. This is, and that starts to lead to real resolutions of the problems, real, now you can solve the problem. And by the way, now you really put a stake in the ground for the next generation to look at that and read about it and say, whoa, look at what these guys went through. I don't ever want to go through that. And unfortunately, and this is a lot of personal pain on my part, is that when you admit to all of that, a lot of people aren't going to like you. A lot of people aren't going to like you. Some of them inside the sport because you ratted them out or whatever. And then some people who are observers from outside the sport, they're just like, well, wait a minute, this guy just admitted to all this and he just, like, is going to get away with it? Like, what the, and he still gets paid the next day. So there are a lot of people that are not going to like you, and your personal brand is going to take, a massive hit. And while I don't like that, that's actually a very, very strong lesson to have public for the next generation of athletes to look at and say, whoa, these guys really hurt as a result of this. And I don't ever want to be involved in that. And I'm very happy that they decided to take that step for my generation. And I'm going to make good on that. And that's really what's happened culturally. The testing technology and all that was always happening behind the scenes, and that has gotten better and better and better and better every single year. And hats off to World Anti-Doping Association, U.S. Anti-Doping Association for making that happen. But the cultural change, the shift there was, it just went from like this giant omerta type sport where no one talked about anything to now, if the level of responsibility our athletes feel, even amongst each other, is incredibly high. Like, if one of our athletes sees his roommate at a race taking vitamins that aren't approved by the team doctor, he'll flag it. They'll flag it immediately, which is unheard of. In my generation, it was just you didn't see anything, you don't talk about it. Now it's like, oh, hey, by the way, I don't think you should be taking those because, those, has the team doctor seen that? And are we sure that that's okay? And blah, 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 which of course, 99.9% of the time it is, but it's just one of those, that behavior of feeling responsible for the entire organization and feeling responsible for the entire sport, that's a cultural 180. The profoundness of that change, that's like basically, I don't even know how to... it's like the equivalent of the mafia basically turning around and saying like, oh, hold on a minute, you really do need to pay your import duty on those goods you just brought in. But that is what has happened in the sport of cycling, and it's great to see, simply because I don't feel like we're ever going to have another kid. Well, we have to keep on top of this, but for now, there aren't kids coming into the sport that give up because they don't want to switch off their moral compass. And I watched a lot of people in my generation just give up and quit because they didn't want to switch off their moral compass and just go down the rat hole.
Well, it's just such a great story because in leadership, you set a culture which, some people think is, ping pong tables in the lobby and, Monday, Friday, Wednesday off, happiness, in other words. And those leaders who really get culture, which is about uncompromising beliefs and very high behavioral standards that you live and die by, those leaders get tested in these moments that you're talking about. And there's an expression that, the best leaders would rather lose doing it their way than doing it any other way. And you were such a teacher for me and for others around the cost of doing the right thing. And now some years later, the reward of having done so. And just that lag, it gets a little personal, but, having been on an Olympic team and traveled in Europe with my former teammates, you become really close to these teammates. They become family for all intents and purposes. There's a love when you're suffering together and winning together and losing together and staying in crappy motels and stuff. And I know you had that relationship with Lance. And, for you to pull off what you wanted to do with this team and, your views on the price you were willing to pay. I mean, have you and Lance ever had a moment of reconciliation, or is that relationship toast? I mean, how has that panned out?
No, there's no reconciliation there. I mean, he still views it as, that it was against him, that it was some sort of personal vendetta about him. It was, I mean, it's a very, I know this term is so overused these days, but it's a very narcissistic way of looking at it. That, what we did actually had nothing to do with Lance. Lance, unfortunately, was in the way of what we were trying to accomplish, i.e., he did not want to be honest. He did not, he wanted to basically just dig in his heels and say everything I did was completely legit and how dare you question that, and I'll take you to court, la-di-da-di-da-di-da. The reality of it was about making a systematic change in the entire sport, and it was about trying to switch the culture in a it's a pretty abrupt way, and Lance just didn't want to be a part of that. And he viewed it as sort of ratting out your teammates. And, I mean, he, to this day, he'll say, oh, JV, well, you sold out your teammates. And it's like, well, no, actually, they also came forward and, spoke very honestly about the past. And I think they probably feel a lot better about that. But in his view, it's still this very, sort of what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas mentality. And he views me as somebody that didn't live up to their promise of omerta, which I'm fine with. I mean, I don't think those philosophical views are so divergent. I don't think there's a whole lot of reconciliation. I mean, other than this podcast, I don't talk about Lance. Lance talks a lot about me whenever he gets a chance, which I find amusing. He loves to disparage, at any chance he gets, but I'm a little past that. And
Jonathan, just to be abundantly clear, the respect that the sport and others like me who have followed it over, 3 decades, we really look up to you. I mean, changing worldwide culture by forming one team and doing it the right way, that will have a legacy for decades to come for young athletes to have a place in the world where they don't have to compromise their health and their integrity. It's a big deal. And I don't know if you'll ever get enough credit for what you did and the cost that you paid to do it. I want to change gears past that little.
Yeah, let's get past that, man.
Sour moment. Sorry. I have two things I want to highlight. I'm just on your. I had never been to your website, by the way.
Oh,
Sorry, it's
yeah.
cool. It's a really well done website.
Thank you.
It's so cool because here's the site pro cycling team. The headline says "Explore the world with us." Super cool. And then this is what it says: We're pro athletes, cultural enthusiasts, and world travelers with a hunger for adventure. We're in search of new perspectives on our bikes and off. We are EF Pro Cycling, a different kind of pro cycling team. Who wrote that, and why is that on the front page of the site even before you get to your athletes?
Well, I mean, I think a mission statement is always a pretty important thing, and I mean, we could talk endlessly about what we were just talking about, but one of the key components that I always felt with developing a culturally anti-doping team and actually changing the sport into something that's culturally anti-doping is you have to remove, like, how do I put this? Sport is sport. Sport should be a game. Sport should be fun, but it should be a fair competition in a competition that is done out of passion. Okay. And then you have the financial component of all sports, and we are abundantly aware of this. That on all professional sports, there's a lot of money to be made by the athletes, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of money at stake from sponsorship. In cycling, the model was basically you get your sponsor publicity by winning races, and that is the only way you get your sponsor publicity is by winning races. So if you want to be successful in the eyes of your financial backers, you have to be getting their name on the front page all the time. And if you aren't doing that, it's unsuccessful and your organization will fail. Now, I know there is a component of you have to win in professional sports to be in the top of the top. But I do believe that it shouldn't be so closely tied to the finance of everything. So what we tried to do, and this is not easy, but every single head of marketing director that we've ever had inside of our organization, the first question I asked them in an interview, or at least the most important question I asked them in an interview, is how are you going to promote this team and its sponsors and its partners when we haven't been winning anything in a long time? What are you going to do? And so that statement is basically saying this team is about developing young people. This team is about crossing, cultural boundaries. We have I think it's 19 different nationalities between the men's and the women's teams now. It might be 20. I mean, we are a very cosmopolitan team. I mean, it's an American registered team, and I'm actually proud of that because I view it as almost like the original version of America. It's people from all over the world immigrating into America. We are a melting pot of a team that, like, they all have their individual cultures, and we're bringing it all together into the culture of EF Pro Cycling. But I've always made our mission, if we're winning races, that is the frosting on the cake. But the cake is that we are ethical athletes. We are going to play the game fair. We are going to be fun. We're going to find ways to promote our partners and sponsors, whether we're winning or whether we're not. We're going to try to create a little bit of a wall in between sponsorship money coming in and race results coming out. And it's a permeable wall, but there's something there, that it's not just like 1 + 1 = 2. Like if you win 2 races, you get $2 million back or whatever. It's that we're making it so that we have an image, we have a brand, we have a personality that goes above and beyond winning. We have a fan base that goes above and beyond winning. And we've had, like during the COVID years where we had to do massive budget cutbacks, we were not winning anything. We lost all our top talent. But in that period, we were still able to generate a story of what the team was about. And that storyline was still effective for our sponsors and backers. And so that's what that's about. I think Matt Bowden is who wrote that, who's our director of communications.
Well, hats off to Matt. That's a really, that's an awesome thing to see on a website. And look, going full circle, that celebrates both the 10% of the time that you win and maybe most especially the 90% of the time that you lose. And when you talk about going to get sponsors, especially in this day of social media, the inclusive lifestyle and story that you are giving the average American or anyone from the world access to participate alongside you for the journey is very powerful. And we should just take a moment. The alignment with EF Education is pretty cool too, because there you've got really three customers within that business. You have the students that are using that platform to explore the world and find a sense of adventure in an otherwise, digital world. You've got the parents who want to make sure that their kids who are going on these trips with EF are going to be led in a in an environment that's healthy. And then you've got the universities that want to promote their sense of adventure, and the fact that your team found that partner that so well aligns with your beliefs and values, Jonathan. What can we say about EF and aside from getting on your knees and praying to God that you found them, how has that relationship evolved over time?
Well, I mean, first of all, you're right in that, EF, I feel like where you fall into trap, and I was talking about winning on top of Mont too, that's winning out of obligation to your sponsor, to your partner, to your financial backer. That's not winning for fun. That's not winning for passion of the sport. EF, where we align so well, is EF loves to win. They're a highly competitive organization. I love to win. I'm a highly competitive person. We love to win as a cycling team. But each and every one of those wins has to be born out of passion. It's not just getting the job done, quote unquote. And that's where, things sync up really well, because ultimately, this isn't sort of like the participation award type mentality, which I don't like that either. But it is the mentality of, like EF is very much a mentality of we're gonna work really hard, we're gonna play really hard, we're gonna have fun, but we're gonna do this in a creative new way. We're gonna find a way to win that no one else has found, that little seam in the fabric to kind of punch through and get to the other side and win that way. That's they have that constant sort of scrappy, even though they're not an underdog in their field right now, at least they're not. They're very much the top dog, but they still have that like scrappy underdog mentality, and it just pervades through the entire company. They're always looking for like a new way to jump over, to go over to the side, to find a way through, to find a way to win. And that when they do win, that it's bore out of passion, not out of obligation. And yeah, that just syncs up with what we're doing. I mean, that's why I get asked a lot in professional cycling by other teams. Like right now, I think in the win ranking, we're like, I don't know, 6th or 7th in the win ranking, which is pretty damn good. But like, a team like, I don't know, Soudal, which consistently wins a ton of races every single year, and they're higher. They're probably 4th or 3rd or something in the win ranking right now, and they'll always, their comms people will come in and say, "How is it that when you guys win, like when we win, it's sort of like, okay, that's nice, next." And when you guys win, it's like no matter what race it is, you get this like huge buzz off of like every single win, that like people are like really checked into the fact that you won, and then how is that possible? And I think it just has to do with it's not just that you win, it's the way in which you win. You do it under the context that you created for yourself and you created for your company. You do it in an ethically correct way. You do it in a way that with an athlete that's an interesting, well-spoken, great person. You don't just do it with a robot. And those are the people we attract. We attract highly individualistic. They're really hard to manage. I mean, our team as a whole is very difficult to manage because we attract all the people that don't want to be part of the robot world. They want to like do their own thing. They want to come in and be given some space, and they've got their own ideas. Well, okay, that's great, but in an organization of 200 people, I mean, and everyone is trying to create their own space. It's a lot of work, and it doesn't always work. But when it does, the passion of that shows through. It shows through that, like, okay, this wasn't just like this systematized victory that like got thrown in one end and punted out the other. No, this was like this person has ownership of it, and they love the fact that the team supported them in their individuality, that supported them in sort of their quirkiness, and that that they were given all the resources, obviously the coaching and the nutrition and the aerodynamics, they were given all the resources of the system, but they weren't forced to do it in sort of a very specific way. They were allowed to kind of put their own little spin on it. And when people win like that, they love you, i.e. they love the sponsor, they love the team, and that love of the sponsor and the team and all the partners involved, that bleeds right through into media. I mean, that shows in any form of media. And that's why you get so much a greater lift every single time we win versus a more mechanical type win.
Yeah, we have an expression at Relative. We say, be you and align with us, and what we mean by that is everyone should celebrate their own superpowers and bring their own particular brand of juice to the table. And if you establish the right guardrails and the right culture, it's the best when you are on a team where you can celebrate people's individuality. And boy, what a great role model for cultures that we're building in our companies. You could use the word inclusive, but that might sound a bit woke, but it's something like that brings out the best in people and builds, enduring and extraordinary organizations. It's also funny. I've never been to your website. Okay. And I've never been to your LinkedIn page either. Funny stuff. But I was interested. The thing under my picture for a number of years was kind of cool private equity guy,
right?
Which was kind of like a jab at my industry, which I kind of loathe, and kind of all the cool bros out there, and my fiance, now girlfriend at the time, told me to take that down, that it was kind of beneath me and kind of too,
yeah,
whatever. Yours is so cool. It says dreams are nice, crisp execution is better. Where'd you come up with that one?
I just made that up, but it is something that I very much believe in. Is that that your dreams are going nowhere if you're not trying to execute on just the very mundane daily tasks that go into making dreams reality. I mean, I obviously have big dreams, and I spend a lot of time daydreaming and thinking about, wouldn't it be great if this happened? Wouldn't it be great? But like ultimately, what I've found has led to some of my dreams coming true is going about the mundane plodding tasks of just the everyday stuff, and actually trying to get 1% better at all the everyday stuff, and that eventually if you're sort of aligned toward this specific dream, that like eventually something pops and that it comes through and then your dream becomes a reality. But like without that, without crisp execution in professional cycling, you don't win anything. Like you have to execute on all the details. And by the way, 98% of the time, everything still goes wrong anyway. But like if you don't have, the best tires that are lower rolling resistance and puncture resistant, if you don't have all of your riders positioned on their bikes in a way that is not going to injure them, but yet is still powerful and aerodynamic, if you don't have, a clothing partner that is providing you with the fastest, most aerodynamic gear that also keeps you warm, if you like on and on and on, like if you don't have the water bottles mixed just right, like if you screw up the mixture in the water bottles by just a little bit, like all of these little things make the victory either possible or impossible. I think we love the emotion of victory, right? So the dream part of it, right? Yeah, you could see that guy, he just pushed through it really hard. He pushed harder than everyone else. I'm sorry, but there's a psychological component. Some guys can push themselves harder than others. Okay, but at the highest level, all these people are pushing themselves absolutely to the limit of their physiology, of their genetic makeup, of their humanness. They're at the border all the time. So what makes the difference is, to me, is just executing on all these like little tiny details behind the scenes, like just making sure that everything is running perfectly smooth for them. And people would say, well, you really think he, won the race because his water bottle was mixed just right, or because he was using a slightly different helmet that was a little bit more aerodynamic, or what? I mean, well, when you're coming down to a group of athletes that are all incredibly highly trained, all genetically incredibly talented, all have the focus of a tiger, all are willing to push themselves. Okay, so what's making the difference? Well, in my opinion, what's making the difference is executing on the little teeny tiny details that 98% of the time you don't get reward for that. Like, it doesn't work. And the fact that you had slightly faster tires doesn't matter. You still got beat by somebody better, whatever. But that 2% of the time that you do, that actually it pops through, and there's this little teeny detail that like, oh, that's what made the difference. Like, nobody wants to hear that story. Nobody wants to hear the story of like, well, we started using a scoop and a half of mix as opposed to a scoop of mix in the water bottles. Nobody, that's boring. Like, the fun story is like, this kid grew up in a cornfield and like, and hacked their way to the top by riding their bike at night with lights on, and then that's the story that they want, and those stories certainly exist. They don't want the little trinkety detail story. But if you want to see what makes an organization in a highly competitive sport that is just racked with X factors everywhere, getting those details right every single day, even when you're losing, eventually that executing on those little things is what makes the difference.
I love that. And that's probably a decent, if not spectacular, way to end our time together. It's so cool to see you on the other side of COVID, Jonathan. I mean, you and I had a lot of dinners during those dark times when you were really short on money and resources. And as you said, losing athletes. You were in a tough spot. And what I saw was a return on your passion and your obsession, and you just kept grinding. I mean, to your credit, you kept grinding, kept raising money, kept getting out there in the world and finding athletes, and God knows where you found them. But you've assembled one hell of a team that come hell or high water. Tour de France is coming up here very shortly. You're going to win either way. And it's so fun to see even your posture and your smile today is a reminder of how far you have come as a leader, as a CEO, as a founder, and one-time cyclist. Thank you for your time today, especially during probably the most tense time of your season. Thank you for being such a great friend and partner to me. And I can't wait to watch you all crush it with smiles on your faces in July. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, and thanks for being a fan. Every single time I get, whatever, somebody comes up to me while I'm riding my bike around Wash Park or something, they'll say, "Oh, I'm a really big fan of the team," and I always say, like, yeah, we need those. That's what makes the sport go round, is the fans. So anyway, I appreciate that you like the organization, like what we're doing, and yeah, thanks for having me.